Humanity has long told stories of giant creatures resembling huge reptiles. These stories can be found in folklore, religious texts, and myths of different peoples. What is surprising is that these creatures have remarkably similar characteristics, even in cultures that have never had contact with each other. In China, dragons have been part of beliefs for thousands of years. They were described as powerful creatures with scaly bodies, large claws, and long tails. Many historical sources claim that dragons were even seen and caught. Ancient records mention living dragons that were presented as gifts to emperors. Finds attributed to them were later declared to be fossil remains of unknown animals. In European legends, dragons were often described as huge predators that lived in caves or swamps and attacked livestock. One of the most famous motifs of medieval literature is the battle of knights with these creatures. It is important to note that in many cases, descriptions of dragons are not mythological, but quite specific in nature. Sometimes even the exact places where they dwelt are indicated. Scandinavian sagas are also replete with stories about giant snakes that had massive limbs and long bodies. These creatures resembled reptiles and, according to myths, could destroy entire settlements. Coincidences in details make you wonder, could all these legends have a common origin, associated not with imagination, but with real observations? Ancient Slavic tales have preserved images of the serpent Gornik, a multi-headed reptile that had a giant body, scales, and wing-like appendages. Similar creatures also appear in the myths of other Eastern European peoples. Given that the Slavs have hunted large animals since ancient times, isn't it logical to assume that these stories could be real? One could assume that all these stories are just folklore. However, too many details coincide. How could it happen that peoples, separated by thousands of kilometers and having no contact with each other, described similar creatures with similar characteristics? If these creatures never existed, why are they etched in the memory of humanity around the world? In China, dragons were not only part of mythology, they were considered real creatures. Emperors claimed to be descendants of dragons, and historical records contain detailed descriptions of these creatures. Some ancient texts even mention cases when dragons were seen or caught. In Chinese medicine, there was a term, dragon bones. Presumably, these were the fossilized remains of large prehistoric reptiles that were found in the mountains. Instead of studying them, they were ground into powder and used in medicine. One of the most interesting stories happened in 1611, when a dead dragon was found in Sichuan province, which had been lying on the ground for several days before being picked up by local residents. Eyewitness accounts suggest that this creature had a strong body, scales, and large limbs. Such stories are not isolated. Many Chinese chronicles contain similar descriptions in which dragons were seen near reservoirs, in mountains, and even in dense forests. Another case occurred in the 20th century. In 1934, farmers in Hunan province reported seeing a huge reptile with wings flying over a field. After that, a strange mist remained in the sky, and local elders recalled that their ancestors had told about similar phenomena. Ancient Chinese texts often indicate that dragons possessed divine wisdom and could disappear or relocate into the waters. This may be a poetic description, but also an assumption that these creatures lived in hard-to-reach places, remaining out of the sight of humans. Modern science explains these stories with myths and cultural features of the Chinese, who worship dragons. But could it be that these descriptions are not based on fiction, but on real observations of species unknown to science? If so, could it be that the Chinese emperors were not just symbolic descendants of dragons, but preserved knowledge of creatures that really existed? Unlike Chinese chronicles, where dragons were often described as wise and powerful creatures, European legends mostly depict them as predators that threatened people and livestock. Norse sagas, medieval chronicles, and folk tales have preserved amazing descriptions of these creatures, which have much in common with dinosaur-like animals. One of the most famous is the story of Fafnir, a giant serpent from the Norse sagas who guarded treasures and had strong scales that could not be pierced by ordinary swords. Legend has it that Fafnir had short legs, a powerful tail, and could spit poison or fire. All of these details are reminiscent of descriptions of large predatory reptiles, and his impenetrable skin may indicate bone plates similar to those of some dinosaurs. The Icelandic sagas also contain numerous references to the rattlesnake, a large creature with a long body and massive jaws, which lived in remote caves and swamps. The age of these stories is estimated at more than 1,000 years, but they continue to be passed down from generation to generation, which indicates their importance for the culture of the ancient Scandinavians. Similar stories are also found in the British tradition. The famous myth of St. George, who defeated the dragon, is found in many European texts. According to descriptions, this creature had a powerful body, a long tail and sharp claws. Interestingly, medieval texts sometimes note that the dragon lived in swampy areas and had thick skin, similar to a shell. In France in the 13th century, there was a myth about the Tarasque, a huge reptile that lived in the south of the country. The description of this creature contains features that are characteristic of dinosaurs. It had thick legs, a long tail, and a shell-like body. It is believed that the story of the Tarasque could be based on real people's observations of some large reptile. Another mysterious case is the testimony of the 15th century from Italy, where the knight Ettore Spandino allegedly met and killed a creature that the locals called the Last Dragon. According to the descriptions, it was a large reptile with short legs and powerful jaws. If this story has a real basis, then we can assume that in some isolated regions of Europe in the Middle Ages, the last representatives of the ancient species could have survived. Considering all these stories, it is difficult not to pay attention to the repeating details. If dragons are just myths, why do their descriptions so closely resemble real reptiles? Why do they appear in the folklore of independent cultures around the world? Could it be that people actually encountered these creatures, and their stories eventually transformed into legends? Legends of dragons and giant snakes are so deeply rooted in human culture that it is impossible to simply dismiss them as fiction. But if these descriptions are based on real events, the question arises: what creatures formed the basis of these stories? Modern anthropologists often explain myths about dragons by the fear of snakes. But can this version explain such specific details as the presence of thick paws, a massive tail, bone plates, or even the ability to fly? If you compare classical descriptions of dragons with the found fossilized remains of dinosaurs, you can notice a striking similarity. Researchers who study ancient texts draw attention to one interesting feature. Many legends do not just talk about fictional creatures, but about specific places and real people who encountered these creatures. Medieval European chronicles record the hunting of great reptiles. Some texts even detail how their bodies were dismembered or brought to cities as trophies. If we consider these myths not as fiction, but as memories of real creatures, we can assume that dinosaurs or their descendants could have survived much longer than is generally believed. Could some species of large reptiles have survived in isolated regions and then disappeared due to hunting or natural disasters? There is a belief in the scientific community that many mythological creatures are simply distorted accounts of long-extinct animals whose remains were found by ancient people. But if this is the case, why are the descriptions of these creatures so detailed and similar in different parts of the world? Why have historical documents preserved accounts of encounters with them? If we look at history from a different perspective, perhaps we should reconsider the very concept of myths. Studies of ancient texts and archaeological finds suggest that at least some of these stories may be preserved memories of real events. This raises an even more important question. If these creatures existed much later than we think, what else might be hidden in the history of our civilization? There are many stories in the world about creatures that are described as resembling dinosaurs, and among them one of the most famous is the story of Mokele-mbembe. This creature, according to local legends, lives in the swampy areas of the Congo River in Central Africa. The described characteristics of this creature are strikingly reminiscent of sauropods, giant herbivorous dinosaurs with a long neck, massive body, and powerful tail. Local tribes pass on stories about Mokele-mbembe from generation to generation. They claim that it is a large animal that moves like an elephant, but has a long neck and hardly leaves the water. Some eyewitnesses even claim to have seen it destroy the boats of hunters who sailed into its territory. Interestingly, the first European mentions of this creature appeared back in the colonial era. In 1909, the German explorer Carl Hagenbeck who was engaged in the search for exotic animals, learned from the locals about a large creature resembling a dinosaur. He even wrote about it in his memoirs, suggesting that the Congo could be inhabited by relict animals that survived the age of dinosaurs. In the 1980s, several expeditions organized by American and European researchers tried to find evidence of the existence of the Mokele-mbembe. Although none of them was able to present irrefutable physical evidence, some researchers received testimony from local residents and even took blurry photographs of strange tracks in the swamps. Skeptics claim that the Mokele-mbembe is just a legend based on observations of well-known animals such as elephants or rhinos. But can the explanation be that simple when descriptions of the creature have remained unchanged for centuries, and local tribes believe it to be real? If such a creature does exist, it could mean that dinosaurs or their descendants were able to survive in isolated ecosystems inaccessible to modern science. But if even one species of dinosaur survived for millions of years, how many more hidden creatures could exist in unexplored regions of the Earth? Unlike the Mokele-mbembe, which is described as a herbivorous creature that lives in swampy rivers, the Buru is a predator that has been seen in the Himalayan regions. Stories about it have been passed down among local tribes for hundreds of years, and all of them describe a creature that has the features of a large reptile. According to the stories, the Buru lived in the high-altitude lakes and swamps of Bhutan and northern India. The locals described it as a large creature with a long body, powerful limbs, and a massive jaw. Some legends mention that the Buru attacked livestock and sometimes even people, forcing entire settlements to move away from its territory. In the 1940s, British explorer Charles Stoneham, having heard about these legends, organized an expedition to the mountainous regions of India. He collected numerous testimonies from local residents who confirmed that the creature existed as early as the early 20th century. But the most interesting thing is that they said that Buru disappeared only a few decades ago, when people began to drain its habitat. Skeptics suggest that the stories about Buru could be based on observations of large snakes or crocodiles, although there are almost no such reptiles in the Himalayan regions. Another assumption is that it was an unknown species of monitor lizard or giant salamander, but this does not explain the stories about its aggressive behavior and size. If Buru really existed and disappeared only recently, this once again confirms that some species of large reptiles could survive the extinction of the dinosaurs and survive to this day in remote regions. Given how inaccessible the mountain lakes of the Himalayas are, perhaps Buru is another mysterious creature that may still be waiting for its discovery. Tales of large flying reptiles similar to pterosaurs are found in many cultures, from ancient civilizations to modern eyewitness accounts. Although official science believes that these creatures became extinct 66 million years ago, some mysterious sightings make us wonder whether individual species could have survived to our time. One of the most famous cases occurred in the 1800s in the United States. Several newspapers reported that cowboys in the Wild West had shot down a giant flying creature similar to a pterosaur. One of the publications was even accompanied by a black and white photograph showing a huge winged creature with a wingspan of over 3 meters. Although this photo was later lost, many cryptozoologists believe that the story may have a real basis. In the 1950s, reports of flying creatures with large webbed wings and elongated heads began to appear in Texas and Arizona. Some eyewitnesses described them as living dragons or giant featherless birds. Despite numerous accounts, no physical evidence of their existence has been found. But perhaps the most amazing stories come from Africa, specifically the Congo and Cameroon. Some local tribes have legends about a creature they call Kong-amato, a flying reptile that lives in the dense jungle. The locals describe it as a giant bat with a beak filled with sharp teeth. Researchers who have visited the region have repeatedly tried to learn more about this creature, and they have been amazed that tribes, who do not have access to modern books or films, draw images that resemble pterosaurs. Another story dates back to 1932, when British explorer Frank Weldon was in Zambia. He claimed to have seen a giant flying creature flying over a river at sunset. His description was almost identical to scientific reconstructions of pterosaurs: an elongated head, a long tail, large webbed wings. Why do so many accounts from different parts of the world tell of the same creature? Is it just a cultural phenomenon or a misperception? Is it possible that prehistoric species can actually survive in the most isolated corners of the planet? If so, where else could these unknown creatures be hiding? Eyewitness accounts of giant dinosaur-like reptiles can be found all over the world, but is it enough to challenge the official version of science? What is real evidence and what could be observational errors or fiction? One of the biggest arguments in favor of the existence of relic dinosaurs is that such accounts come from different parts of the world and from people who have never had contact with each other. It is important to note that many of the local tribes who tell stories about these creatures do not have access to scientific books or films, so their descriptions are based on their own experiences or stories passed down through generations. However, critics point out that human memory can be unreliable. People can confuse real animals with mythical creatures or misinterpret what they saw. For example, large birds or bats may seem like mysterious flying creatures, and crocodiles may seem like prehistoric predators. However, there is also more compelling evidence, such as footprints found in different parts of the world. In Texas, fossilized footprints were discovered, which, according to some versions, could belong to two-legged dinosaurs, and next to them footprints similar to human ones. If this find is genuine, it could change the idea of when and with whom humans coexisted. It is also worth paying attention to the testimonies of researchers who conducted expeditions in Africa and South America. Many of them received identical descriptions of the creatures from local residents, which excludes coincidence or cultural influence. If these were just myths, they would have much more variation in details. Another important factor is video and photo recordings. While most of them are vague or contradictory, some of them still have no clear explanation. For example, footage of large flying creatures recorded in the USA, or pictures of unknown reptiles in the depths of the jungle. Ultimately, the question remains open. The evidence is not yet enough to change the official scientific picture, but it is enough to raise new questions. If even one of the witnesses was telling the truth, then we are faced with a mystery that could completely change our understanding of the world and what creatures have actually survived to this day. We have seen that many discoveries raise questions. But what if dinosaurs did not disappear? What if there are those who saw them with their own eyes? Eyewitness testimony in the next issue.